This morning he stood at the V-mail counter, mess hall coffee steaming while the flag rope clinked outside at dawn softly. An officer scoffed, pressed his form across the glass, said heroes sign receipts, not hope. The year on his chapel pass was off by 1. He steadied a dented canteen cup, silenced then the chapel hymn hush, and slid a V-mail home like a promise finally spelled correctly, a thin blue square that outlived the noise. No one knew that the letter he mailed that morning would make every warship rethink the shore. Let me take you back, quiet men leave echoes too, still running. The shipyard horn groaned over the bay, a sound that shook dust from the rafters. Inside the drafting room, rolls of blueprints curled under a fan that refused to die. A.J. Hinson adjusted his glasses and tapped a small wooden model that rocked on his desk, its flat bow catching the morning light. Mr. Hinson, one of the procurement officers, said, his tone half-laugh. "You're suggesting we build a boat that lands on sand?" "Not suggesting," Hinson replied, demonstrating. Coffee clinked in a thermos behind him. A pencil snapped. Another officer leaned on the table. "This isn't the bayou, son. You can't just float a truck onto a beach." Hinson slid the blueprint across the table paper, whispering against the wood. "She doesn't float onto it. She rides it. Hull angle hydraulic trim watch." He lifted the model and tipped it forward. The little hull glided over the paper like a beetle on glass, stopping exactly where a jeep outline was drawn. Silence spread. Only the gulls outside answered. A colonel cleared his throat. "You really think you can land a jeep on dry sand in 10 seconds? "I don't think," Hinson said. "I can prove it." The youngest officer chuckled. "With what bayou magic?" Hinson smiled faintly. "With geometry." The laughter around the table came like a low tide of disbelief. Pages shuffled, boots scraped. "You'll waste steel and manpower chasing this myth," the colonel warned. "It's not a myth," Hinson said softly. "It's math. You just have to float the impossible." He set the model back on the desk and steadied it with a finger. The wood hull rocked once-twice as if deciding whether to believe him. The officers filed out muttering equations they didn't understand. One of them, Major Keene, lingered at the door. "Your calculations show 3 minutes per drop. That's impossible. Check the units." Hinson said without looking up. "You misread minutes for cycles." Keene frowned, realizing the numbers weren't about time at all, they were about rhythm. Outside sunlight flashed on the half-built hulls along the slip. Hinson reached for his thermos, took a slow sip, and stared through the workshop window toward the bay. The tide was running out, exposing long streaks of sand, an image that matched the lines on his drawing board. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, they're not approving the materials." "They will," Hinson said. "They'll want to see it fail first. What if it does?" He smiled again, tired but certain. "Then we'll learn something real." The assistant nodded, scribbling a note. "Test model ready by morning." Hinson brushed sawdust from the model's hull eyes, following the grain as if it were a coastline. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we launch what they called a myth." Rain tapped on the tin roof like a metronome that wouldn't quit. The drafting lamps glowed dimly, haloing the edges of paper rolled across the long oak table. Blueprints overlapped each other in blue and gray, the lines streaked where saltwater fingers had smudged graphite. A.J. Hinson leaned over them, sleeves rolled high, a pencil tucked behind his ear. Around him, 3 junior engineers argued about the slope of a ramp sketched in heavy pencil strokes. "It'll shear right here," said Farley, tapping the drawing. "At 15 degrees the hinge gives. We've run the numbers twice." "You ran them with the wrong load constant," Hinson said. "You treated the jeep like a barge, not a bullet." Farley frowned. "You can't push that much steel at that speed." "It'll fold." "Then it folds," Hinson said, "and we find out where it talks back." The youngest engineer glanced toward the rain outside. "Sir, the Navy Committee's expecting a full report by Monday." Hinson didn't look up. "They'll get data, real data, not a committee guess." He reached for a slide rule, scarred from years of drafts, and dropped it across the blueprint. "Check the ratio again. You're missing the line of thrust between these ribs." Farley exhaled. "You think stress is patience, sir. Steel doesn't have feelings. Steel listens," Hinson said. "You just have to speak in force and give it time to answer." A flash of lightning lit the room. For a moment their reflection trembled across the wet window, 4 men who believed too much or not enough. Later that night they hauled a wooden model out to the test pool behind the workshop. Rain made the water ripple like liquid tin. They propped a narrow ramp at one end, its bolts already rusting from use. Ready on the gauge, Hinson called. Ready. He pushed the model down the track. It struck the surface, skimmed forward, and shuddered halfway across the pool before nosing into the shallows. Failure at hinge 3, said Farley, checking his watch. Good, Hinson replied. Now we know what not to trust. Another test followed, then another, until the lamps burned low and the pencil notes blurred from damp fingers. Each attempt ended the same way: something bent, something cracked, something learned. By midnight, Hinson sat alone at the drafting table again, pencil tapping against the broken scale rule. Every error teaches steel patience, he muttered. The rain eased, leaving the clock tick loud enough to feel. He circled the last equation in red and drew a heavier line through the failed angle. Then, almost to himself, he said, "The math isn't wrong, the assumption is." Outside, the tide struck the pier pilings in slow applause. The rain in Norfolk came sideways that morning, cutting across the pier like thrown wire. A.J. Hinson stood at the edge of the slip collar, turned up eyes on the gray outline of his prototype, half boat, half stubborn dream, bolted to a flat barge and tethered to winches. The deck vibrated from the steady hum of a welding arc somewhere under the canopy. Sparks hissed into puddles, dissolving in quick steam. Diesel engines idled low, the sound mixed with the faint clatter of tools and muttered calculations. "Inspectors late," said one of the crewmen. "Weather's got them stuck in town." "No," Hinson said. "They're waiting to see us fail first." He stepped onto the deck, running a hand over the hull's edge. The steel was slick and cold, but the lines were right flat. Bow-reinforced hinges, hydraulic vanes hidden under plates. Farley clutched a clipboard near his chest. "You sure about the ramp pitch, sir? It's steeper than spec." "Specs don't touch mud," Hinson said. "Men do. Keep it." 2 naval engineers watched from the pier hats, pulled low notepads sealed in wax paper. One called out, "Mr. Hinson, proceed when ready." Hinson nodded to his crew. Engines ahead half. The barge shifted. Water churned brown beneath the prototype's stern. When it hit speed, the boat lunged forward down the ramp, skimming for 40 feet before its blunt nose caught the shallows. A heavy splash. Then silence. "She buried," Farley said, voice flat. The inspectors wrote something, closed their notebooks, and turned for shelter. Hinson climbed onto the mud-bound hull. The water line lapped halfway up the ramp. His boots sank an inch deep. "Mark that," he said. "Sir, that's the end of the trial," another crewman warned. "We'll need hours to reset." Hinson's jaw tightened. "Not hours. 5 minutes. Back her off. The winch can't pull that load. Then use the engines. Reverse slow. She'll talk." Mud sucked at the hull as the diesel growled. The boat groaned, shuddered, and inched backward. A surge of muddy water freed it, leaving streaks along the steel like battle scars. Farley shouted over the noise, "You're tearing the prop guard. Better torn than timid." Hinson replied, "Set her again." But the inspectors, they saw what they came for. "Now we show what they missed." He turned toward the rain eyes fixed where gray sky met darker sea. "Next run, we don't stop." The crew hesitated, then moved, tightening straps, realigning the ramp, clearing debris from the bow. A younger man slipped, righted himself, and smiled despite the cold. "Think she'll ride this time?" he asked. "She has to," Hinson said, "or we're back to rowing." Lightning flickered far off the bay. The welding torch fell silent. Even the engines idled low. For a heartbeat there was only the soft percussion of rain tapping metal and the pulse of men waiting for a signal. Hinson raised his hand. "Engines ahead, quarter. Keep your eyes on the bow." The prototype rolled forward again, slower now, steady as a heartbeat. Spray arced off its sides, and for a moment it hovered on the edge between sinking and gliding. The bow rose, caught air, and pushed clear over the shallows before settling back into open water. A cheer broke behind him, half laughter, half disbelief. Hinson didn't join in. He only watched the ripples smooth behind the boat, the color of victory disguised as mud. The air off Guadalcanal tasted of salt and cordite. Diesel fumes drifted over the lagoon where the Higgins boat prototype idled, its gray paint streaked with dried mud from the last test in Norfolk. Now, the same design faced its trial under real war conditions, Live rounds, real tides, no second takes. A.J. Hinson checked the stopwatch hanging from his neck. 3 minutes round trip, he told the crew. Not a second longer. The coxswain, a 19-year-old Marine, grinned nervously. "Sir, if we hit that sand too hard, then we learn faster," Hinson said. He tugged his cap lower and pointed toward the shoreline, a strip of pale sand lined with palm stumps and smoke. The signal flare went up a red star, sputtering through low clouds. Engines roared to life. Chains rattled as the ramp mechanism armed. Hinson felt the vibration in his ribs, that dense mechanical rhythm of something built to defy theory. "Mark start," he shouted. The stopwatch clicked. The craft surged forward, cutting across the surf in a blur of spray. The hydraulic hiss of the bow ramp trembled through the hull. Pressure gauges wavered, but held steady. Water slapped against the steel plates, each impact a question waiting to be answered. 60 yards, the coxswain yelled. Hinson gripped the guardrail. "Hold the throttle, ride the wake, not the wave." The boat slammed onto the beach in a spray of sand. The ramp dropped. Chains sang. 40 troops poured out boots, thudding onto dry ground. A jeep rolled down the ramp like a punctuation mark. 11 seconds, Farley shouted from behind the gauges. "Reverse." The hydraulics groaned but obeyed. The ramp clanged shut. The boat backed into the surf, coughing exhaust. Hinson's jaw tightened as he watched the tide reclaim the ruts they'd carved. The stopwatch needle spun. 2 minutes, 37 seconds. The boat cleared the reef. "Time, 2:59. Farley said, voice hoarse. The beach commander lowered his binoculars. "That can't be right." "Run it again," Hinson said. Another flare arced upward. They repeated the sequence run in drop-unload reverse, each pass smoother than the last. After the fourth, even the officers on the ridge stopped pretending not to watch. A gust of wind caught the spray, carrying it back across the test pier. Hinson wiped his face and stared at the stopwatch again. 3 minutes exact. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The engines idled low, the sound like a heartbeat catching its breath. He felt the pressure ease from his chest, the way a hinge relaxes after too much strain. Farley leaned beside him. "Sir, you just proved the impossible." "No," Hinson said quietly. The boat did. Across the shore, the Marines began chalking marks on a board, landing times, load counts, extraction intervals. The numbers formed a rhythm: 3022, 58, 300, 301, a new cadence for how wars would move. The senior inspector approached, coat flapping in the wind. "You realize what this means?" "Mr. Hinson, every invasion plan we've written is obsolete." Hinson didn't smile. "Then start rewriting them." He walked toward the bow boots, sinking slightly into wet sand, and rested a hand on the steel ramp. The heat of friction still radiated through it. "You did it," he whispered to the machine, as if speaking to a stubborn apprentice finally grown up. Farley stood a few feet behind. "They'll want blueprints, production specs, supply chains." "They'll get them," Hinson said. "But first, they'll understand what those 3 minutes cost." A burst of wind snapped the American flag above the pier. Hinson glanced once more at the stopwatch, the second hand frozen at the mark, and slipped it into his pocket. 3 minutes, he said under his breath. And the war just shifted. The sound of surf filled the silence that followed, as if the ocean itself had paused to count. The factory never truly went dark. When the night shift bell rang, another sea of workers flowed through the gates, men in oil-stained overalls, women in kerchiefs and coveralls, their footsteps merging with the rhythm of machines. Rivet guns popped in steady percussion, and the smell of hot metal and primer paint filled the Louisiana air. At the far end of the main bay, a banner read, "Every boat a bridge." Beneath it, blue sparks flared as welders sealed hull seams under floodlights that made everything shimmer like a living tide. "Station 5, clear," a foreman shouted. "Station 6 ready." Another voice answered. A.J. Hinson walked the central aisle, boots striking the concrete in a measured pace. He had traded his shipyard cap for a hard hat, but the intensity in his eyes hadn't faded. The sound of the line surrounded him, a thunder made of effort and belief. "Sir," called a young supervisor, barely 20, waving a clipboard. "We're short 30 feet of hydraulic line. The supply's late again." Hinson glanced toward the clock. "Reroute from Bay 2's reserve." That'll delay the next lot. Not if we double the welders. 2 seams per panel. Tell payroll it's overtime. The supervisor hesitated. We've already hit the quota this week. Then break it, Hinson said. We're not building boats. We're building a rival. He turned toward the row of newly finished hulls gliding along rolling tracks. Each one bore a serial number stenciled in white: LCVP 3701, 3702, 3703. The pattern felt endless. A woman riveter, her gloves streaked with aluminum dust, wiped her forehead and looked up as he passed. Mr. Hinson, they say you named her after yourself. He shook his head. No, ma'am. She names herself every time she floats. Behind him, the assembly line thundered like a heartbeat. Chains lifted bow sections, swung them overhead, and set them down onto new hulls. Sparks bloomed and died. Paint guns hissed in unison. By dawn, the plant glowed orange through the windows. A choir on the PA began to play When the Saints Go Marching in its brass echo blending with the metallic rhythm of work. 1,000 hammers kept time. Hinson stopped beside a welder crouched over a ramp plate. The man's mask was up his face, streaked with soot. He looked up from his weld line. You ever sleep, sir? When the boats stop, Hinson said. The welder smiled faintly, laying a hand against the warm steel. He built more than boats. He built a chance. Hinson didn't answer. He only watched the ramp being fitted the same chain and hinge design that had once snapped under test stress, now reproduced by the thousands, with no hesitation. At the end of the line, a bell clanged 3 times. Another boat slid off its cradle down the greased slipway into the water beyond the factory. A cheer rolled through the crowd of workers who had stopped just long enough to see it float. A man in the paint bay whispered, "That's number 20,000. Keep counting," Hinson said softly. "The ocean doesn't stop." The line started again. The rivet guns popped in rhythm with the song still playing through tinny loudspeakers. Chains rattled overhead, moving faster than before, each link gleaming from friction and repetition. Outside, dawn mist hung over the river like the breath of the work itself. From a distance, the factory's sound rolled across the city, low, constant, unyielding. The boats never slept. The museum smelled faintly of salt and oil, the way old steel remembers the sea. Light from the harbor windows glinted off the curved hull of a landing craft, suspended mid-room. Its gray paint restored its chains polished until they caught reflections like ripples. A bronze plaque beneath the bow read, "Design of Dignity, Andrew J. Hinson, 1942. Visitors moved quietly around it. A veteran in uniform paused, touching the cold edge of the ramp. Nearby, 2 young Marines in training fatigues watched a documentary screen looping in grainy black and white. On the screen, the same shape cut through surf ramp down sand, flying men running ashore. A narrator's voice, low and certain, filled the hall. This boat carried not just soldiers, but the faith of every engineer who refused to quit at impossible. One Marine whispered, "That hinge design, we still use the same geometry, sir." The older man beside him nodded. "Same math. Better steel." They stepped closer to the preserved hull. Hydraulic lines, frozen in display, curved like veins beneath its surface. The Marine reached out but stopped an inch short of the metal. "Looks alive," he said. "It is," the veteran replied. "Just resting." Outside, gulls wheeled over the pier where the modern landing craft waited. Engines idled with the same low hum that once filled Hinson's shipyard. Each vessel bore the subtle ancestry of that first prototype, the blunt bow, the folding ramp, the promise of return. A lieutenant called from the dock. "Training cycle begins. Let's move." The young Marines jogged out, helmets under arms. The camera of a museum exhibit caught their reflection as they boarded the new craft. A monitor switched feed from the static photograph of Hinson in 1942 to live footage of the sea blue and endless. On the deck, the instructor shouted over the engine noise, "You're standing on 80 years of proof. Don't forget who built your footing." Spray hit the lens. The view blurred, then steadied on the horizon. The rhythm was the same as it had always been: throttle surge, ramp release. Inside the museum, the lights dimmed for closing hour. A docent switched off the display, leaving only the sound of wind moving under the suspended hull. It groaned slightly as though remembering motion. Someone had placed a fresh canteen cup beneath the plaque, filled halfway with seawater. No sign, no label, just a quiet offering. The veteran turned to go, hesitated, and looked back once more. Every wave, he murmured, was a promise kept by design. The room fell still again except for the faint hiss of the tide against the wharf outside. The surface caught the reflection of the restored hull through the window, gray steel on gray sea, past and present, touching at the waterline. Still running. In the museum's quiet hangar, the old landing craft rests under skylight beams, its steel dulled to a soft pewter sheen. Each morning, light moves across its blueprint lines like a memory, replaying itself, revealing the tiny weld seams that once bore entire wars on their balance. A museum card beside the hull reads, LCVP Design, Andrew J. Hinson, proven 1942, and beneath it, a faint line etched by hand. Good design serves, then disappears. Somewhere beyond the glass, new engines start on the pier. The sound folds into the silence here, precision echoing through decades. A visitor touches the blueprint frame, noticing how dust drifts like a cloud shadow over the ink, yet every line remains clear. The proof is visible persistence, written in steel patience, rendered in welds. Micro-echo. Every craft still answers the tide. Kicker legacy floats unseen but alive.